So welcome to Unbroken, the safe place for male survivor podcast. Because every male survivor deserves hope, healing, support, and a BMW. And here's your male survivor, leadership coach, and hypnotherapist, Thomas Edward. Hey, welcome to once again Unbroken, the safe place for male survivors. All right, this is your male survivor resiliency coach, Thomas Edward. All right, coming to you live from Sacramento, California. And tonight, you know what? I'm just chilling. So I got the fireplace, going, throwing a couple of logs on there. Now, it does get a little bit cold here in Sacramento. Maybe not as cold as it is in other places, but, so it dips into, in the evenings, it can dip down to like 45 or something like that, which for those of you guys that are from other areas, because I used to live in Chicago, it's like, that ain't nothing. But when you get used to this weather, it's like even 45 feels like, oh, that's pretty chilly. So, so I had to throw the little fire on, finishing up the work for the day. Hey, working with some international clients, male survivors, and those of you that are out there listening, I just want to let you guys know I'm so proud of you. This is not an easy thing when we're talking about working through these issues, but one of the things that you just continually to see over and over and over again, those guys that are consistent are the ones that really get the best results. It's not easy. There's a lot of painful stuff. But when you start implementing the things that we put in place and you do them consistently, you start noticing that your brain starts to change. The neuroscience is so true. And that's one of the reasons that in this program, you guys will notice, and I know people get tired of me talking about the neuroscience, but it's like, ooh, there's something about that brain. And when you use it, it's like, okay, right? You usually get the better results. So appreciate you guys, working through the program. Some of you are on the 9-month program. This is like your 3rd month in, and you're like, whoa, when you're consistent, you just notice the changes are like happening. Not just with you, the people around you, your businesses are growing. Why? It's the Keystone effect, right? And so we're changing just a few of those, we're going to say poignant, critical things in your life, and then everything else starts to change. Also following that path. So thank you so much for the opportunity to work with you guys. Someone told me the other day, they're like, man, you should have a waiting list. They're like, man, this stuff just works so well. I know, but the thing is, guys, when we're dealing with these issues, oftentimes we don't want to talk about them. We don't think about them. Sometimes they're oblivious to them. We don't even know that we need help, right? Now, if we got to that point, I promise you I would have a waiting list. But you know what? We do the best that we do, and we help those that we can. All right, tonight we're going to discuss a little bit this about trust, which is really important. It's something I thought about as I was working with the guys tonight, and I was just thinking about just some of the people that have come through the program and thinking about some of their stories and even thinking about the whole idea of trust. And that's kind of why I entitled it, can I trust anyone? Because that's a big question that comes up for us. And so let's talk about trust just a little bit. So not the way I'm going to say that people casually throw that word around in relationships, but the way that trust feels in the nervous system of a man whose body remembers actually being betrayed. Now, most people, I'm going to say, think that trust is a choice. You've probably heard that before. And so they think it's about deciding to open up, or deciding to be vulnerable, or maybe deciding to let people in. Okay, and so they tell you, what you just need to communicate more, or you just need to stop being guarded, or hey, not everyone is like those people in your past. And the thing is, when people say that, what they don't understand is that when you're a male survivor of childhood sexual abuse, or I say any type of childhood abuse, neglect, emotional, those different type of things, trust isn't a decision that you make in your mind. It's actually a survival calculation that your body makes before your mind even speaks. Now, I want you to think about that. I want you to just think about, what I just said, and if that's you, because maybe all these time you've been listening to people who are saying some of the things that I've just said. They're like, hey, why don't you just do this more of that. And you're like, that's not working. And maybe it's not working because really it is your nervous system that we're talking about. We're talking about the survival calculation. So if the first person who harmed you was someone that you trusted, if the first man that you looked up to was the same man who violated you, if the community around you actually praised your abuser, if no one protected you, if no one believed in you, if no one even asked, like, what's going on with you, then what happens is your system learns people are dangerous, closeness is dangerous, needing someone is dangerous, and then being seen, right? So actually being visible is dangerous. Now, we're going to add something on it. Now, if you're a black man on top of that, so add all that and now bring in that element. And the world already expects you to be silent. They expect you to be strong, or they expect you to be unemotional, to be self-reliant, to find your own, right? Pull yourself up by your own bootstraps. And then your pain starts to become invisible. Your vulnerability actually becomes a liability, and your distrust actually becomes what? Your strength. Your distrust actually becomes a strength for you. Now, this is not the story, I'm going to say, of people or men who push people away because they don't care. This is the story of men who learned that connection cost. It costs more than actually isolation. So I'm going to share with you someone that I work with, Jamal. And Jamal's story actually, I'm going to say, fits into, if we want to say, this narrative. And so we'll hear a little bit about his story.
My whole life, people said I was independent, strong, focused, emotionally stable. The guy who handles things on his own. The one who doesn't break down, doesn't ask for help, doesn't need support. And honestly, I wanted them to see me that way. I wanted to believe that was who I was. It made me feel like I was in control, like I had power, like nothing could touch me. I didn't realize until way later that what people called strength was actually isolation dressed up as discipline. I never forgot what happened to me growing up. People talk about suppressed memories or blocked trauma. I didn't have that. My memories are sharp, too sharp. I can tell you the exact details, the way the door clicked shut, the smell in the room, the way my body stopped moving, the way that I kept quiet afterward, like silence was the only way to survive. My abuser wasn't a stranger. He was a respected man in the community. Black man, successful, trusted. People let him around their kids because he seemed like the kind of man who helped, the kind that uplifted people, the kind you pointed to as a role model. That messed me up in ways I didn't understand back then. If someone like that can do something like that, then what makes anybody safe? And if the world already doesn't believe black boys about regular life, why would they believe us about sexual abuse? I didn't speak up because I knew silence was safer than truth. I didn't want to be around men. Not coaches, not peers, not older guys trying to mentor me. Every time a man got close, my body tensed up. I smiled, cracked jokes, act social, but inside, I was planning exits. Around women, I could breathe, I could relax. I didn't feel watched or measured. I didn't have to perform masculinity. But then people started making comments, calling me soft, saying I must be gay because I didn't act like other dudes. That just pushed me further away from everybody. Masculinity felt dangerous. Femininity felt safe but misunderstood. Community felt risky. Isolation felt like the only place I still had control. As I got older, the isolation didn't feel like trauma. It felt like identity. I handled everything on my own. I never asked for help. I never leaned on anyone. I didn't talk about feelings, not because I didn't have them, but because I learned feelings don't keep you safe. When I finally tried therapy, it felt like talking to people who studied trauma from the outside. They understood textbooks, not what it means to live inside a body that carries trauma and also has to walk through the world as a Black man. I talk about the abuse, they turn clinical. I talk about race, they get quiet. I talk about masculinity, they change the subject. I felt like I was educating them. That defeats the point. One therapist literally said, "You seem fine. Maybe you don't need deeper work." No, I was just good at hiding. My sister was the one who called it out. She did her own healing and recognized the signs in me. The distance, the surface level relationships, the constant independence, the way I never let anyone get close enough to disappoint me. She heard you speak at an event and said, maybe he could talk to someone who actually understands this from the inside. That's why I reached out. I don't want to live isolated forever, but I don't know how to let people close without feeling like I'm giving up the only power I have left. I'm not trying to trust everyone. I just want to stop living like closeness is the same thing as danger.
So in Jamal's story, Jamal didn't just, wake up one day and decide that he didn't need people. He learned it. And he learned that men could hurt him while actually smiling in his face. He learned that women could care, but actually not protect. He had learned that community can love a predator actually more than a victim. And he had learned that strength meant silence. And he learned that asking for help meant risking disappointment. That's what he says there. And he learned that vulnerability actually for him invited danger, not connection. So guess what he did? He built a life that looked successful, focused, disciplined, emotionally contained, self-sufficient. And of course, people praise that kind of man, at least in our society, especially Black men. But what looked like confidence can actually be camouflage. And what looks like for him, which was independence, was actually self-protection. And then what looked like maturity for him was actually it was trauma management. And so Jamal wasn't strong because he healed. He was strong because he was alone, right? He didn't really have to interact. That's why you guys will hear me often say this phrase is that healing doesn't take place in isolation. It takes place in community. If you don't have anything to bounce off anything, then how are you really healing? You have no idea, because no person is an island and you have to interact with other people. All right, so let's just run down our normal, if you want to call it, protocol of what we hit, and of course the CSA route. So for Jamal, the trauma didn't start, with the abuse itself. It started with the context that was actually around it. And notice the things that he said. And so one of the things was the abuser was actually admired. And so for him, when we're talking about the CSA, that really created some confusion. And so just think about that. You're thinking that, hey, if everyone loves me, if everyone loves him, how could what that person did to me be wrong? Okay. Now remember, this is the hard thing oftentimes for us adults, because we're not going back and but wait a minute, this is my child brain that's thinking these things, right? Still sophisticated and complicated, but that's how it's seeing the world. Or that his abuse happened in relational proximity. So it wasn't, someone who was considered a stranger. It was someone who was considered a trusted actually figure in his life. And so then that imprinted, let's just say, a core belief on him that the people that I trust are the ones who will hurt me. Why? Because the person that he trusts was a person who actually hurt him. The next thing I'm going to say when we talk about the root, the CSA root, was I'm going to say community silence. And so you'll notice that there was no space to speak. He didn't have the language, and there was no support. And so what that did, that just created another internal rule. And that internal rule just pretty much says that, hey, my safety depends on me staying quiet. And we have that internal rule that's developed for a lot of male survivors out there. Now, he talked about this, the cultural expectations of Black masculinity. And so from that came the idea that you've got to be strong, you don't cry, you can't be vulnerable, and you just don't break. And so this coded emotional pain, and this is how he would see it, as weakness, not wounds, but it would be seen as weakness. And then he had, I'm going to say, his identity. His identity was actually fused with endurance. And so it was like he wasn't healing, so he's not healing, but he's enduring with dignity. That's what we mean by that identity. It's kind of fused with this idea of endurance. And so that creates a man who doesn't ask, well, wait, how do I heal? What he's asking is, hey, how do I survive this without anyone knowing? All right, so those are the basic, we're going to say the basic CSA roots, the roots of the CSA. Now, remember, he has, of course, and he talked about some of them, the reinforcing factors. And so as he was talking, Jamal said that as he grew, he says everything around him actually confirmed this isolation. So remember, he said that male spaces felt unsafe. So for him, locker room, we hardly go to the locker room. And then for him, especially in the community, the Black community, barbershop was off limits because you got a lot of brothers, a lot of dudes in there, right? And so that's helping to create that unsafe space. Sports, okay, one of the places where, as guys, we come together, we talk about different type of things, sports, stats, that place would be unsafe, right? Just brotherhood, just all these areas actually felt threatening. But then notice he talked about some other reinforcing factors, and he says, well, in the female spaces, it felt safe. But the thing was, he felt safe, but he wasn't really bonding. And so there was comfort in this space, but there was there without belonging. So it's like, hey, I don't really belong to this. I feel comfortable here, but I don't really feel like I belong. Okay. Now, unfortunately, the therapist that he had, and he talked about that, kind of lacked, I'm going to say, the cultural mirroring for him. And so, like he said, they had, book knowledge and stuff, but they really couldn't relate to like what this trauma looked like in me. And then also, from coming from a Black perspective. And so they had knowledge, but that knowledge had no resonance with it. He talked about his independence, how his independence got praise, and that was a reinforcing factor of keeping him in this state also, right? So people loved the version of him that needed nothing. And now if you ever thought about that, and I remember, experiencing this years ago, and I'm like, there was just some people or some individuals in my life, and there was just some things that were said, and I'm like, why would they react that way? And then I'm like, oh, you know what? Because they see me as a person who doesn't need anything from them. And so then it was easy to be friends, right? So, if I needed to be vulnerable, but I didn't show, oh, well, that's great. We don't have to hold that space for tea, right? And so his independence actually got praised. And then he talked about also there about society minimizing Black emotional pain. And those of you that have done studies, those of you that are in the medical field, you already know this, right? And so this comes from our past, a horrible past here in America, and those different type of things, the way that they would treat Black people and slaves, and always thought that their pain threshold for some reason was higher, and so that they could handle things or pain more. But the point is, if someone's beating you and whipping you all the time, and if you say something about it, you get even more, well, what are you going to train yourself to do? You don't say anything. It still hurts, but you don't say anything. So that even leaks in over for him. And then he talked about his faith community protecting reputation. So, the person in his community will trust it. Everyone's like, hey, this is such a great guy. And so what do you learn? Well, the contributing factor, reinforcing factor is I don't want to make waves, right? And because if I make waves, then I become visible. Well, everyone's like, well, what's wrong with you? We all think this person's a cool dude. And so each message was teaching him the same lesson, right? So I got to look like that I'm strong. I can't say anything. I got to be alone, isolated. And then when silence earns that approval, the healing just feels like betrayal. All right. So that's our reinforcing factors that's going along with the CSA roots. Now, for him, what were the adult impacts in his life? Well, by the time he gets to adulthood, Jamal life, it looks successful on paper, but it's not internally. And I run into so many survivors like that, especially the overachieving ones. And so what they're doing is they're overachieving because by distracting themselves with busy work, and it keeps them from actually having to focus on what the real issue is. Or for him, hyper independence. So you notice he talked about he did everything alone. That wasn't by preference, right? But because he's relying on actually feeling unsafe. If there's other people around, if I have to interact, then I feel unsafe because I might have to be vulnerable, or they might see something and then ask me a question like, what's wrong with me? So it's easier to isolate, to be independent. Emotional scarcity also was an adult impact on him. So he wasn't numb. He would just ration it. And he would ration it to the point where people would never really see what was going on. Unfortunately, for him, he had limited male relationships. So they were surface level, functional, but they were never intimate. And when I think about that, there's something about this program, and I just don't really know how to explain it, intuitive or not. But what I've noticed about this program, there's something about as we're working through these issues, working it through with other men. Because for some reason, and we don't have this in America today, look, when I visit other countries, or you go to Africa and you're hanging out with some of the different, they have what's known as kind of rite of passages. I guess our rite of passages here, you get to drink when you turn 18. Maybe that's it, or 21, whatever it is. 21. But yeah, driver's license, I think, is 18. So we don't really have rites of passages here. And I just noticed that the guys that actually come through this program, when they're doing it with other guys, it's like that actual rite of passage, or it functions actually that way. So that just came to the top of my mind, so I'll just throw it in there. But for him, he had limited male relationships because of that. Of course, he felt misunderstood by women, so he's accepted, but he's actually unseen. And so then in his adult life, he's sabotaging actually romantic intimacy. And so he pulls away when the closeness requires him to actually be vulnerable. Then he has, I'm going to say, no support seeking behavior. So he would rather break internally than to actually ask for help. Okay, once again, but if I ask for help, what does that mean? I'm no longer invisible. I have to be seen. And you get to see that part of me. And then we're going to say exhaustion, probably disguised as, stoicism. So he's worn out from actually holding everything in and being alone. And so he didn't really fear the connection, but he feared what connection would actually demand of him if he were to allow that. All right, guys, here we go. So now we're going to jump a little bit into our neuroscience insight. All right. So when we think about Jamal's struggle with trust, it wasn't, I'm going to say philosophical. It was actually physiological. Okay. So his body, once again, you guys here goes Coach T. He's going to talk about the nervous system. Yes, I am. Because his nervous system learned early that closeness equals threat. And so he never got the chance or the opportunity to update, we're going to say, that map. And so here's what was actually happening, I'm going to say, in his body. So here's neuroceptive, we're going to call it neuroceptive threat detection. So before Jamal thought about whether someone was safe, his nervous system made the decision automatically. Okay. And so the neuroception is going to ask questions like, hey, does this person's presence feel familiar? Hey, does their energy or their vibes resemble some type of past harm that we've experienced? And then, hey, my proximity to this person, does that increase my danger? Okay, so these are the things that are going on, we're going to say, at the neurological level. So the neuroceptive threat detection that's going on. And so for Jamal, male presence actually triggered those micro responses. And I remember when I met him and we started working on a few things. And even I noticed, with him, just being in the same room, if we were sitting, whatever, at a table or whatever, talking, depending on my proximity, I would sit and I would body scan and see what was going on in his body, right? And so I noticed his shoulders, they would tighten. And then like he said, and I can relate to this because I used to do this all the time too, scan exits. Right. So you're looking for a way out. If I don't feel comfortable and things are going down wrong, I'm scanning for the exits. And then mine was a little bit different too, because I had taken martial arts. I would scan the exits and then I would figure out how many seconds it would take for me to put you down on my way to get out the door. Those are the things that goes on inside of our minds. I remember him with the shallow breathing, emotional withdrawal, and just this kind of urge, I'm going to say, to disengage, right? So those of you that can relate to that experience, that's Jamal was actually experiencing those things too. And so he wasn't closed off, but his body was actually preparing for battle type of deal or escape, whatever it might be. Then I'm going to say the next neuroscience thing is that the trauma was linked to an associative memory. And so remember, even the reactions that we have, that our brain gives them meaning. They link to whatever. And so the brain doesn't just store events, it stores the contextual patterns also. So because his abuser was trusted, because his abuser was respected, because his abuser was male, and then because his abuser was, I'm going to say, culturally protected by those around because he was a good person, whatever, the brain linked masculinity itself to danger. And so that's why when you hear him saying that, man, you know what? When the ladies and stuff were around, I could chill. I felt comfortable. I felt Okay, but it was in the presence of the other dudes, guys. Well, I couldn't hang with that, right? And that's because the association that's being made with masculinity in his brain is danger. And so this means that Jamal's nervous system didn't actually really react to individuals. It was reacting to categories. Okay. The next thing I'm going to say, going on from a neuroscience perspective, I'm going to call it, and I don't think I've talked about this before, and I can't remember. I think we talked about this in psych in grad school, but the oxytocin paradox, especially for male survivors. Now, those of you, so oxytocin, we're going to say, is a hormone, neurotransmitter or hormone in the body. And oftentimes it's actually released, especially those, ladies, if you've had a baby, the oxytocin is released in your body. So you're going through all that pain. Get this baby out of me. And poof, it pops out. And I know it doesn't just pop out, but when the baby's out and is delivered, and then all this pain that you've had for 16 hours and down, you look at that baby and you're like, oh, they're so cute. That's the oxytocin that's actually working in your system, okay? So we call it the bonding hormone, or I call it the cuddle hormone. So it works, when you got the person who's a jerk, right? But you still like, oh, okay, right, this time. Okay, so that could be a little bit of oxytocin that's going on there. So what it does is that it lowers your defenses. It increases what's known as emotional safety, and it actually builds trust, right? And it's an actual hormone. Okay, so now think about this for him, and think about this for us as male survivors of childhood sexual abuse. The oxytocin, so this bonding, being close for us, can actually intensify the fear, right? Because we don't want our defenses to be lowered, because that's how we get hurt. We don't want to have the emotional safety because we might get hurt, right? And why do I want to build trust? That's what I did before, and that's how I got hurt. So do you understand the oxytocin paradox? And so this release of the hormone, which causes us and helps us to bond with people, is actually intensifies the fear for us, so it doesn't reduce it. Well, why? Well, because closeness is the same state that we were in when the harm, when the trauma, when the event actually occurred. So instead of closeness, comfort, the wiring becomes closeness, exposure is equal to danger. Okay? So before, normally it would be closeness, gives us comfort, right? But now the wiring is closeness is exposure, and now there's danger. So that's why intimacy actually feels threatening, even when we really want it. We're still craving it, right? But that system is reacting. And then we've talked about this before, attachment theory, attachment system, right, is now disrupted by the betrayal. So attachment normally teaches us that people meet our needs, okay, especially as a child. Well, who can meet your needs? Well, people, parents, caregivers, they're the ones who meet our needs. But when the betrayal happens, what we see now is that people weaponize needs. Okay, so whatever it is that they needed from me, they just took it from me. And so now that attachment, those needs actually become weaponized. So Jamal's brain is going to avoid needing people at all. Because if I have no needs, there's no vulnerability, and then there's no risk. Let's see, I'm trying to think. Also, when I was working with Jamal, I'm going to say dissociation of emotional expression, maybe from his identity. So Jamal, he didn't lack emotions. He thought he did when I first started working with him. And it's just so interesting because a lot of guys, they'll come in and they'll say to me, well, I have no emotions. And I'm like, what do you? They're like, I just feel numb. And I'm like, well, numb is an emotion. And they're like, oh, right. So it's not, maybe we just haven't learned actually how the words to express them, but that's what he didn't lack emotion. He was just disconnected from emotional expressions from his emotional experience. And so he felt deeply, but he didn't internalize it, right? So dissociation, just think of it, kind of just brush it off the shoulder or don't acknowledge it. Now, I think when we were in grad school, we had called this, it was a term, and we called it like suppress affective signaling, okay? Which I know that's just like whatever. You know, it's funny. I'm just thinking, I mean, we will always learn these different terms and stuff. And I would always challenge my teachers in grad school and stuff. I'm like, okay, so is that what I'm going to do? Is that what I'm going to go up to a client and say, well, you know, right now you are suffering from suppress affective signaling. I'm like, what is that going to mean to them? Not much. And so I would just go up to say, hey, so this isn't just numbness. This is really self-protection, right? So that's what suppress affective signaling actually looks like. And then we have what's known as sympathetic dominance, which is a simple way to say that is that you're just in a chronic survival state, right? So this becomes your baseline. And so his baseline was alert, but not relaxed, composed, but not open, calm, but not safe, right? And so that was his sympathetic dominance or the sympathetic system, or I just call it chronic survival state. So when we think about Jamal, men like Jamal, you and me, right? So they often get praised for being calm under pressure, but really the hypervigilance is there, and it's like you're just never really off duty. All right, so what did we do to actually help Jamal? I'm going to say some of the strategies. So I'm going to say Jamal's healing didn't begin by trying to force trust. That was one of the main things, and that's the reason I titled this one, Can I Trust Anyone? But it became the idea of actually creating safety proximity without, I'm going to say, requiring vulnerability, right? And so it's kind of like letting the person know that you're there for them, but you're not requiring, hey, you know, it's not like, okay, well, now that I'm here for you, I just need you to spill out your guts and tell me everything, whatever that's going on. But creating safe proximity is like, I'm in the same area with you. There's not anything that I'm really demanding of you. I'm just letting you know that I'm here. I'm here to support you, right? And so you can't start with intimacy when the nervous system still interprets this closeness as danger, right? And so you have to start, I'm going to say, with tolerable presence and gradually expand that capacity. And that's what we did as we were working together. And so there were different steps that we used. So we used proximity before vulnerability. So instead of, hey, open, just go ahead, come on, you know, you want to get over this, just start opening up to men. Okay, to your nervous system, that would be a giant shock, a giant no, there's no way in hell we're going to do that, right? So we practice, hey, how about if we can just be around safe men without armoring up? Okay, so now that's the difference, because now our brain's going to have to figure out, what does safe actually look like? We're going to have to start giving it opportunities and options to experience that. So maybe coffee conversation, maybe just a shared space, right? But we don't have to disclose the trauma, okay? Or maybe what we're trying to do when we talk about this is we're trying to retrain our nervous system that being near men is not equal to danger. And that was one of the first things I had to work with him when we're talking about strategies, because I'm working with him, right? He's a dude. I'm a dude. He doesn't trust dudes because, right? And so we had to actually go through that. I'm going to say the second strategy we used was, I'm going to say, relationship neutrality. So not performance. So Jamal didn't need to, I'm going to say, connect to heal, but he needed to stop associating closeness with the loss of control, because that's what was going on inside of his brain, his mind. That's what he was associating closeness with. And so we started reframing connection from, hey, something to perform, as something that you actually allow. Okay, so connection. What does that mean? That means that I have control when I'm the one who is allowing the connection, right? So you notice how we reframed that. For him, we had some really challenging ones. The whole cultural safety, comes first. And so he talked about this. Remember, he's like, okay, so I have someone, a therapist, they're working with me, but then they don't understand what it's like to be a black person in this body, the things that I have to do. They don't understand my culture. So we needed someone who could actually understand the racial dynamics. That's just the reality of this world that we live in. And I think that's one of the reasons that he actually picked, also because he felt that I could relate to some of the things. And then who would actually understand, I'm going to say, masculine socialization within that culture, okay? And then being able to understand, I'm going to say, firsthand childhood sexual abuse. And for what I noticed for Jamal, we had to make sure that we didn't spiritualize or minimize it, especially because of the background that he had come from. And I'll talk about that maybe in a coming episode, how we often do that sometimes, spiritualize it and we minimize things, those that come from religious backgrounds. And then I'm going to say one of the things was internal safety before external trust. And so we didn't start with forgiveness. We didn't start with reconciliation. We didn't start with, hey, you know what, you need to open up to your family, or you need to go and confront whatever these past relationships. We started first simply with, hey, I need you to start naming whatever these physical sensations that you're feeling. I need you to start with noticing what are the emotional boundaries that are there. And I need you to start to identifying the alarm signals and tracking your body responses actually with people, right? Notice what we're focusing on. We're focusing on the physiology, the neuroscience, those different type of things. And so he learned to actually feel safe in himself first and not safe in others. So remember, he talked about, hey, I really felt safe when I was around the ladies. Didn't feel like there was anything that was expected from me. I didn't have to be vulnerable. But one of the strategies was we had to help him to learn I need you to feel safe with yourself first, to be comfortable in your own skin, right? And that safety is not coming from others. Then I'm going to say another of the challenging ones was helping him to rebuild trust through experiences. Okay, not belief, through experiences. It's interesting because I was working with someone the other day, and as we were working through the program, and they're like, okay, I just want this to go so quick. I said, but here's the thing. I was like, you have to be consistent. And so I said, you have to give your brain enough evidence. And I said, this is the analogy that we're using. I want you to think of evidence as the legs of a table. So we have to give your brain enough legs or evidence to see that table can stand, right? And so this is the same, rebuilding trust through experience, not just belief. And so we didn't try to convince his mind that people were safe. We started creating repeated experiences where he spoke and he wasn't judged, where he showed emotion and he wasn't rejected, where he set boundaries and those boundaries were honored. Now, I had to find safe people for that, and that's one of the cool things about the group and this atmosphere, right? That's what we're all, of course, trying to achieve. And so we're creating this space where you can actually experience these things. And so then where he existed without performing masculinity, where you just be masculinity, right? As opposed to, well, I have to perform it and it has to look a certain way. And so when you experience this, and when he experienced this, it rewires, I'm going to say, what logic cannot. And that's why we had to allow him to feel that. Okay, so, and I have a few more I could even think at the top of my brain, but I think I'm probably losing some of you guys. So when we talk about the coaching and the resiliency, so when Jamal and I first started working together, like I said, he didn't come to like heal the trauma because he had already been with a therapist, whatever before, but he came because he was tired of feeling alone, but didn't know how to let people close without actually wanting to run. And I get that a lot. People, they've gone through therapy, but they're like, but wait a minute. Okay, I realize I was abused, understand I was abused and some of the whatever fancy terms, but I'm still stuck in this point where I still have these dysfunctional behaviors and stuff where my body's still surviving. What do I do with them? And so I remember he told me, he says, you know what? And this is after working together for a while. He says, what? I'm not afraid of people. I'm afraid of needing people. Now, that was a great revelation, for him to understand. That was a real breakthrough. So not just the past event, but how that event shaped his relationship actually to connection. So instead of going into, disclosure or a lot of memory work or I'm going to say emotional excavation, we took, I'm going to say, just a little bit of a different approach. And so we found places where he could be around safe men without giving anything of himself. Okay. Well, that's one of the reasons for creating this environment. So he could do that with men who were actually saved. And what? Actually, that gives them a chance to bond, right? And so now our oxytocin is working the way that is actually supposed to work. And so the first step was just kind of, low pressure setting, small group, a meeting of us guys. And usually if you come to the workshop retreats, we have no more than 12 guys there, because for just one facilitator, me, that's about all you can handle is 12 guys. So just a smaller, intimate group, but also where you don't feel like you've got to speak, like you've got to perform, you have to impress anybody, or you have to share, right? And so, but you do get to hear, and when you do hear other people and things that they're going through, sometimes I think it just encourages you, right? And so for him, that was a win. That was a win. And that's because, like we said, healing doesn't start just when you start opening up. And when I mean opening up, like saying stuff, but it starts when you actually feel comfortable to start opening up, when your body no longer is preparing for harm. And then I remember a few weeks later, he told me, he says, hey, you know what? He says, I don't feel totally safe yet, but I actually don't feel threatened either. Woo! Now, some people were like, okay, my goodness, how long is this going to take? But I'm sitting here and I'm celebrating because notice what we're noticing. We're noticing movement. We're noticing progress. And that's what progress looks like. Later, we started practicing, small control interactions, when to enter, when to leave, those different type of things. Stop looking for all the exits. And then noticing how much energy we're actually giving to this, right? When we're protecting like that. And so he learned that connection doesn't mean to surrender. But he also practiced and he noticed, we're going to say, those physiological signals. So he would notice his jaw tension. It's like, ooh, I'm protecting something. Or maybe his stomach would be tightening. It's like, ooh, am I anticipating some type of threat? Or maybe just holding eye contact with people felt a little bit uncomfortable, right? And so, that was a vulnerability risk, right? Or shoulders rising, emotional bracing, all these different type of things. So over time, his nervous system started to actually build new associations that I can connect and that I can actually stay safe. So by the time we finished, I think I worked with Jamal somewhere between 9 to 12 months, maybe almost up to a year. And I remember him saying something that he had never said before. He says, I can see myself actually having male friendships now. And he says, it's not because I trust men, but it's because I trust myself to protect me. Whew. I had to pause. I had to pause because just even remembering that statement, and for some of you that are dealing with this and you hear that statement, you understand how powerful that is. And look how he got there, right? That's a turning point, right? And so healing isn't learning just simply to trust people, but to trust yourself. Healing is learning to remain yourself in the presence of others. All right, guys. Okay, that was Jamal's story. And like I said, there's way more. But like I said, one of the reasons for sharing this story, because there's someone out there, there's other male survivors. You're listening to the stories and you're like, that's me. And that's the reason I'm sharing. I'm going to say that maybe the level at which I'm going in might be a little bit deeper because I want you to realize, one, that you're not alone, and that this doesn't mean that you are broken, damaged. It just simply means that your nervous system, your physiology is still in survival mode. And that's what we're doing, is we're working here to get us out of that survival mode, right, into a rather emotional regulation mode. So that trust doesn't start with just belief. It starts with capacity. And capacity starts growing by establishing those internal safety moments, not by forcing those, I'm going to say, external vulnerability. And so if you're listening to this and you've lived most of your life alone, not because you wanted to be, but because you felt like the only safe option, this isn't about becoming social. It's about giving yourself more choices. It's about giving yourself more options. It's about not living with your back against the wall. Oh my God, I have another story for that one, but let's survive at work. We'll talk about that maybe later. But it's about saying, you know what? I'm allowed to have people in my life without losing myself. And so you don't have to trust everyone, and you don't have to open up fully to everyone, and you don't have to be vulnerable on demand. But I'm going to say you do deserve to stop living like your connection is the enemy. Okay? Connection is not the enemy. So I just want you to think of a few reflection questions to ask yourself as we close here. Who feels unsafe to you emotionally, and why? If you're dealing with this, these are some of the questions to ask yourself. Do you fear others, or do you fear needing others? Does isolation actually protect you, or is it imprisoning you? Are you alone because you want to be, or is it because you learned to be? And then what would safe proximity actually look like for you? Not just vulnerability, not just presence, but what would that safe proximity actually look like for you? All right, guys, I hope you're still with me here. I hope that you were able to glean, you were able to gain something, from this, from Jamal's story. And don't worry, we'll have another story of someone I work with coming in the future. In the past that I work with, that'll be a future podcast. And hopefully, like I said, my whole goal is just that when you hear this information, if there's something in it that resonates with you, one, that you can take something from it. And then for those of you that this has inspired you, hey, you know what? I want to reach out to Coach T. I just want to send in an email, and I just want to share some of the things, or maybe I'm really interested in this program. Now, you know what? We'd love to have you among the brotherhood of male survivors. So whatever that is for you, I always tell my clients, whatever it is, do something. If you read a book and you got some ideas from it, do something. If you listen to this podcast and it gave you some ideas, do something. Because when you do, it starts to move you closer. And that's what success really is. All right, guys, until our next podcast, be safe.